A few years ago, if you asked industry experts what the future of cars would look like, most of them gave the same answer. Electric. Not maybe, not eventually, definitely. The race seemed over before it even began. One company after another announced massive electric vehicle plans. Governments set deadlines. Investors poured billions into battery technology. Headlines declared a new era. And then there was Toyota, the world's largest automaker, appeared to be moving in the opposite direction. Critics called them slow, some called them stubborn. Others said they were making the biggest mistake in automotive history. But what happened next caught almost everyone off guard, because while the rest of the industry was sprinting in one direction, Toyota was quietly preparing for a future that looked very different. And the real surprise wasn't what they built, it was why they built it. That question becomes even more interesting when you realize how rare this kind of thinking is in modern business. Confidence sells. Investors want certainty. Customers want clear answers. The media prefers simple narratives. The future is electric. The future is hydrogen. The future is autonomous. Simple statements are easy to understand. The problem is that reality rarely stays simple for very long, and Toyota has spent decades learning that lesson. Long before the current EV debate began, the company built its reputation on something that sounds surprisingly boring. Patience. Not the kind of patience that waits around doing nothing, the kind that quietly prepares while everyone else is focused on today's headlines. That mindset helped Toyota survive oil crises, economic downturns, supply chain disruptions, and dramatic shifts in consumer demand. Again and again, the company discovered the same thing. The biggest challenges often come from directions nobody expected, which explains why Toyota seems less interested in predicting a single future and more interested in preparing for multiple possibilities. Think about what that means for a company operating in more than 100 countries. A customer in Norway doesn't have the same needs as a customer in India. A driver in California faces different conditions than someone in rural Africa. Energy availability differs, infrastructure differs, income levels differ, government policies differ. Yet every one of those customers still needs transportation. Toyota's. The argument has always been that global solutions require global flexibility. And whether people agree with that approach or not, it's difficult to deny one thing. The company has been remarkably consistent. While public opinion shifted back and forth, Toyota kept repeating the same message. Different regions may require different pathways. Different timelines may require different technologies. Different customers may require different answers. At first, that sounded conservative. Today, it sounds more like a long-term strategy. At first glance, Toyota's strategy made no sense. Companies everywhere were racing to prove their electric credentials. Every auto show seemed filled with futuristic EV concepts. Every earnings call included promises about an all-electric future. Yet, Toyota kept talking about something else. Hybrids, hydrogen, multiple technologies. A diversified approach to many observers. It sounded like hesitation. The assumption was simple. If electric vehicles were the future, then every dollar spent elsewhere was a wasted dollar. The criticism grew louder each year. Analysts questioned Toyota's vision. Competitors openly challenged their strategy. Even some loyal customers wondered if the company was falling behind. But there was one thing Toyota seemed unwilling to do: bet everything on a single outcome, and that decision would become much more important than anyone realized, because behind the headlines, a different story was beginning to emerge, one that most people weren't paying attention to. The electric vehicle market was growing fast, but growth wasn't the same everywhere. Some countries adopted EVs rapidly, others struggled with infrastructure. Charging networks expanded in some regions while remaining limited in others. Electricity prices fluctuated. Supply chains became more complicated, and battery production demanded enormous amounts of raw materials. Suddenly, the future looked less straightforward than many predictions suggested. The question was no longer whether electric vehicles would succeed. The question became something far more complicated. Would one solution truly work for everyone? And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because Toyota wasn't asking the same question everyone else was asking. Most companies were asking, how fast can we transition? Toyota was asking, what if the world transitions differently than expected? That sounds like a small distinction, but it changes everything. Imagine trying to build transportation solutions for hundreds of countries, different economies, different climates, different energy systems, different consumer needs. A driver in a dense urban city doesn't face the same challenges as someone living hundreds of miles from major infrastructure. What works perfectly in one market may struggle in another. Toyota's leadership believed the future wouldn't arrive evenly. They believed multiple technologies would coexist for decades, and if they were right, the industry could be preparing for the wrong race. Still, there was a problem. Being different doesn't automatically mean being correct. History is filled with companies that stood apart from the crowd and failed spectacularly. So the pressure kept building. Investors demanded answers, competitors gained momentum. Headlines questioned Toyota's direction. From the outside, it looked like the company was defending yesterday's ideas against tomorrow's reality. Then something unexpected happened. The market started sending mixed signals in some regions. EV adoption continued accelerating. In others, growth slowed. Manufacturers adjusted forecasts, some projects were delayed. Questions emerged about affordability, charging access, and long-term infrastructure expansion. Suddenly, the conversation became more nuanced. The future wasn't changing, but the timeline might be, and timelines matter, a lot, because building an automotive empire isn't about predicting next year, it's about predicting the next 20. That's where Toyota's strategy became impossible to ignore. Instead of concentrating everything on one technology, they had spent years building options. Hybrids continued improving. Battery research continued advancing. Hydrogen development remained active. Alternative pathways stayed open. What once looked like indecision started looking more like insurance, not insurance. Against electric vehicles, insurance against uncertainty itself. And uncertainty is something industries rarely admit they have. But Toyota's biggest surprise wasn't technological. It was philosophical. Most companies were trying to win a race. Toyota appeared to be preparing for multiple races at the same time. That distinction changes how you allocate resources, how you manage risk, how you plan decades ahead, and perhaps most importantly, how you survive being wrong. Because every major industrial revolution creates the same challenge. Nobody knows exactly how it ends. People know the direction. They rarely know the path. The automobile industry has seen this. Before technologies rise, standards evolve, consumer behavior changes, infrastructure develops unevenly. Predictions that seem obvious in one decade often look incomplete in the next. Toyota understood something that many discussions overlooked. The future isn't just about innovation, it's about innovation and adoption is messy. Consumers don't make decisions solely based on technology. They consider cost, convenience, reliability, availability, local conditions, personal circumstances, all variables that are difficult to predict on a global scale. That realization shaped Toyota's approach. Instead of asking which technology would win, they focused on serving customers wherever they were. Even if that meant accepting criticism in the short term. Even if that meant appearing out of sync with prevailing narratives. Even if that meant standing alone. Because sometimes, the most controversial strategy isn't moving too slowly. It's refusing to follow the crowd. Now here's the part that nobody saw coming. The debate was never really about electric vehicles. It was about assumptions. The assumption that one answer would solve every problem. The assumption that every market would evolve identically. The assumption that certainty existed where uncertainty remained. Toyota challenged those assumptions. Whether history ultimately proves them right or wrong remains an open question. But that's exactly what makes this story fascinating, because the company wasn't simply making a bet on hybrids or hydrogen or batteries. They were making a bet on complexity. A bet that the future would be more complicated than the headlines suggested. And maybe that's the lesson hiding beneath everything. When entire industries move in one direction, the greatest risk isn't always being too early or too late. Sometimes the greatest risk is believing the future is already fully understood. Toyota looked at the same landscape everyone else saw, the same trends, the same forecasts, the same data. Yet they reached a different conclusion, not because they ignored the future, but because they believed the future might arrive in more than one form. And years from now, When people look back at this period, they may discover that the most surprising thing Toyota did wasn't building a new vehicle, it wasn't launching a new technology, it wasn't making a bold announcement, it was something much simpler. They refused to assume the story. It was already written, and that leaves us with a question. What if the biggest advantage in a rapidly changing world isn't predicting the future correctly, but staying flexible enough to succeed when everyone else gets it wrong?